Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Fiber for Breakfast. We're now in our 17th episode of 2022. Before we kick off, I'd like to thank our sponsors of Fiber for Breakfast, including our gold sponsors, CHR Solutions, Millennium, and Plume, and our silver sponsor, Graybar. We are now 19 days away from NTI issuing the $42.45 billion BEAD Notice of Funding Opportunity. This week, the Fiber Broadband Association sent a letter to the FCC commissioners highlighting the facts and stats on all fiber deployments in the U.S. Last week, Commissioner Carr made an uninformed statement that you can put up a fixed wireless network in a few days, while deploying fiber is a multi-year process. I hope our fiber facts will help educate the FCC on the importance of building critical broadband infrastructure that will serve generations to come. Our Fiber Connect 22 is only 7 weeks away and will be held in Nashville, June 12th to 15th. We have already surpassed last year's record, and this will definitely be the biggest and best broadband event in the world this year. So if you haven't registered already, please do this, because this event is going to sell out much sooner than it did last year. After Nashville, we'll be back on the road and continue our regional Fiber Connect workshops at Copper Mountain Resort in Colorado on August 23rd, and then in Columbus, Ohio on November 3rd. So we hope to see you there. The last 2 workshops have been fantastic. Speaking of records and fiber deployments, during today's Fiber for Breakfast session, we are going to focus on the U.S. fiber surge in numbers. But before I introduce today's guests, I'd like to introduce Trish Ehlers from our team, who's going to walk us through some housekeeping items.
Thanks, Gary, and good morning to everyone who's joined us today. Before I go over a few logistical items, I'd like to thank our Fiber for Breakfast sponsors once again. Gold sponsors CHR Solutions, Millennium, and Plume, and silver sponsor Graybar. Now, if all of our attendees would keep in mind that you're in listen mode only, to ask a question, you can just type it into the question box located in your control panel on the right side of your screen. Gary will host a Q&A session with our panelists at the end of today's webinar. This presentation is being recorded and will be available to members only on FBA's website within 24 hours. You can find the recording in the Events tab under the Fiber for Breakfast drop-down option. At the conclusion of the presentation, you'll be prompted to complete a very brief feedback survey. Please take a minute to do so. We really appreciate your input. I'll pass it back to Gary now to introduce our panelists and get us started. Gary?
Thanks, Trish, and good morning. I'm Gary Bolton, the President and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. Last week at Fiber for Breakfast, we spoke with Nate Wolowitz, the Regional Broadband Program Director for Northwest Colorado Council of Governments, on Western Colorado region's Elevates Broadband. Nate shared with us how the state of Colorado is investing in middle mile and how that investment is elevating the region's ability to support last mile providers' goals to deliver fiber broadband to more unserved and underserved rural communities. This morning, we have the pleasure to speak with my good friend, Jeff Heynen, the Vice President of Broadband Access and Home Networking with the Dell'Oro Group. Jeff is going to share his latest research on not only the surge in fiber deployment, but just how much spending is on fiber to the home equipment and what technology operators are going to be using in the next 5 years. Jeff joined Dell'Oro Group in 2018, and he's responsible for broadband access and home networking market research program. Jeff has expanded the broadband access and home networking areas to include fixed wireless CPE, virtual CCAP, remote PHY, remote MACPHY, a whole bunch of cable stuff here, DOCSIS 4.0 infrastructure. So Jeff's research and analysis has been widely cited in leading trade and business publications. He's a frequent expert judge and an invited speaker at industry conferences and events, including Fiber Connect, which Jeff is going to moderate some of our panels and be a judge at our proof of concept. So welcome, Jeff. I'm glad to have you here. And for our audience, please type in your questions as we go, and we'll hit the Q&A at the end. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Jeff.
Well, thanks, Gary. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak today. So as Gary mentioned, my focus in my area is covering broadband equipment spending, which technologies are being deployed, And I thought this was really relevant to what's going on. And obviously, there's a lot of conjecture about just how much spending is happening on equipment, which obviously, if there's a lot of spending going on in equipment to support fiber to the home build-outs, then that's obviously a clear sign that operators are committed to it. Next slide, please. So obviously, no questions here about the public statements from the major operators in the U.S. They all have now finally committed to passing more homes with fiber. Some have begun to increase their commitments, like AT&T most recently. We continue to see more and more operators, not just the larger tier 1s and tier 2s, but all tier 3 operators as well, continuing their commitment to pass more homes with fiber. And we're even starting to see more cable operators get into the mix as well, and starting to move away from their DOCSIS infrastructure and adding more fiber, not only in greenfield areas, but also in overbuild areas. So clearly what we're looking at is a situation where we think US fiber homes pass could easily exceed 75 million by 2030. And of course, the pandemic and obviously the subsidization that's going on, as well as just general land grab for network expansion, as well as overbuilding, are fueling all of these initiatives at these operators. Next slide, please. So in the North American market, and obviously this is US and Canada, but you can extrapolate that the vast majority of the spending is coming from the US market. We have seen, even in 2021, we saw spending increase to $4.5 billion. Now this slide here shows equipment spending for DSL, all the fiber to the home equipment, as well as cable, and all the associated CPE, including residential fixed wireless CPE as well. And what we've seen here is the growth in terms of spending is clearly outpacing the growth in other regions. And this is true not only for the usual China market, which is clearly a huge market for fiber, but also the Western European market, which now you have British Telecom, Deutsche Telekom, some of the larger tier 1s and legacy PTTs that are finally moving away from their copper infrastructure and making their own commitments to fiber, because they realize what a competitive advantage it provides them and how much future proofing it gives to them going forward. Next slide, please. So within that overall bucket on broadband spending, clearly the biggest growth driver in terms of spending right now is for PON equipment. And you can see here that spending in 2021 was about $1.5 billion in the North American market. And I'm expecting that to increase again to $1.8 billion this year. Obviously, you see right now that there's a heavy focus on building out the infrastructure. If you look historically at PON deployments, that's a general trend that occurs, right? The infrastructure gets built out first, homes are passed, all the splitters and outdoor cabinets are put into place, and then the marketing of the services occurs, and then subscribers are turned up. So if we look beyond 2022, we'll see the ONT spending ultimately catch up. But one thing that's very true now is that if we go back to that slide about the homes passed, is that the infrastructure investment isn't going to stop. If their commitments, and they stay true to their commitments in terms of passing more fiber homes, then this sort of imbalance in infrastructure relative to subscriber turn up via ONTs and other CPE is going to continue through the remainder of this decade. One other thing to mention here is that CPE and ONT availability has been clearly hampered by some of the supply chain constraints that we all hear about. It's difficult to get your hands on new ONTs, especially if you're a smaller operator. And we're continuing to hear anecdotal evidence from operators who are just saying, I've got such long lead times that I'm trying to fulfill backlogs of subscribers who want my service. And so hopefully that situation can be rectified sooner rather than later. Next slide, please. So the other thing that I think is extremely interesting about the North American market over the last couple years is the transition and focus by operators on providing multi-gig services. Now, and this is through the use of XGS-PON, which is symmetric 10 gig PON. And, you know, that looking forward, that technology can accommodate really anywhere from a symmetric 1 to 5 gig service per subscriber. And so what that means to me is that, you know, these operators that are putting in new networks now, they're looking well into the future. And they're looking right now to clearly leapfrog what their cable operator competitors are planning to provide themselves. So it's a very interesting phenomenon. And quite honestly, when you look at in relation to the rest of the world, the North American market is well ahead of the rest of the world in the deployment of XGS-PON equipment. We have a few major operators, of course, that are driving this purchasing cycle, but it's across the board. It's not just tier ones, it's down to the tier 3 level as well. They all see the value of being able to offer a multi-gig service and really protect themselves from any type of upgrades that any competitors might want to offer. And you know, this isn't to say that traditional GPON is going away anytime soon. You can see here that the numbers for infrastructure supporting 2.5 gig GPON is also still on the rise. So depending on the competitive environment each operator faces, there may be a cost balance that they're trying to find relative to the overall CapEx that they're spending. And so GPON will allow them to, in certain situations, be the fastest operator in their particular region. And so that will suffice for, you know, 3 to 5 more years for them. Next slide, please. And so I think the other interesting thing here is that even if the infrastructure that's now going in place can support those multi-gig services through XGS-PON, we're still in very early stages of those ONT units actually going out into the field. So we still have a number of years for the ONT numbers and for those subscribers to be turned up with multi-gig services to ramp. Some of that is supply chain, is limited by the supply chain. And also, of course, the cost of those XGS-PON units remain high because of logistics and because of transceiver costs, but they continue to come down to the point where within the next couple of years, they will reach parity with the traditional GPON ONTs. And then at that point, it's game on for operators delivering multi-gig using XGS. Next slide, please. So, you know, I did mention cable operators, and Gary also mentioned some of the products that I've added in terms of covering what cable operators are doing as well. And, you know, look, they're not standing idly by as their competitors are rolling out fiber. They are pushing fiber deeper, and, you know, a lot of them are moving away from DOCSIS infrastructure and moving to a fiber, which you'll see in the next slide. But even before that, many of the larger operators have plans to improve their upstream bandwidth by moving to a mid-split or a high-split architecture, which won't give them symmetric speeds, but will give them obviously more speed up on the upstream side that allows them to compete, not necessarily on the billboard speed side where they can offer a gigabit downstream, but at least shore up one of the weaknesses of DOCSIS, which is the upstream asymmetry. And so that's reflected also in the fact that they're pushing fiber deeper. It's reflected in these remote PHY units and remote MACPHY units that we're projecting are being put out into the field to replace traditional analog nodes, as well as to replace some traditional amplifiers as they pass those amplifier stations and add more intelligence into the network. You know, one of the big things that's still on the table for these cable operators is DOCSIS 4.0. Some of the time frames are still in question. Supply chain issues with respect to the semiconductors, that's still in question, and also the fact that for extended spectrum DOCSIS, you know, most cable operators are still purchasing 1.2 gigahertz amplifiers, and for extended spectrum, obviously you want to move to 1.8. We haven't seen that move happen in earnest yet. So that says to me that we're talking DOCSIS 4.0 much later this decade. Next slide, please. So, you know, with the concern around the timelines for DOCSIS 4.0 and just the amount of time it's going to take to upgrade the existing outside plant, we are starting to see more cable operators move to a fiber to the home architecture. And how we're seeing that is in tracking these remote OLT ports. So remote OLTs for cable operators obviously are modules or nodes that can go into a traditional node housing, basically move that from, you know, analog support to providing an OLT out of that that last node. And so, you know, obviously these numbers are relatively small by comparison, but what's interesting here is the trend, and I only expect this trend to continue to increase as cable operators like Charter, for example, through their RDOF build out, likely going to use a remote OLT architecture, and you know, more smaller tier 1s and tier 2 and tier 3 cable operators just say, you know, DOCSIS 3.1 is the end game for us. Our next step after that is fiber to the home, and we're going to do so by using these remote OLTs. Now, this isn't to say, of course, that the larger tier 1s are going to move in this direction. They are in some cases where it makes competitive sense, and obviously in greenfield buildouts. But you know, even before they get to that point, there is an opportunity for them to consider building this out and not having to worry about when the 1.8 amps are ready, and when all of the rest of the DOCSIS 4.0 infrastructure will be ready to build out. They can move to fiber and compete and not have to worry about upstream asymmetry any longer. So I think that wraps up my slides. Happy to take any questions.
Jeff, good stuff. You know, I'm a huge fan of yours. And Jennifer, can you move back to one of his first slides? I just, so I'm going to poke at you a little bit, Jeff. I hope you don't mind. All right, this slide here. All right, so these are all members of FBA, so 5 operators, 38 million, but you know, there's 11,000 operators deploying fiber today. So, you know, so I guess I'm thinking this is just a small, you know, you're missing about 18 million homes passed with, you know, you figure, you know, 2 million from municipalities, another 5.5 from cable, our fastest growing segment, rural electric co-ops, and then you got another 7.5 million from the, you know, all the tier 2s and tier 3 incumbent operators that you haven't mentioned here. So I mean, we're thinking that, you know, we're somewhere around at the end of last year, you know, 55 million homes passed, and we're going to see another 60 million plus deployed in the next, you know, by the end of the decade, before the end of the decade. Does that seem reasonable to you?
That seems totally reasonable. I just took a snapshot here of the largest operators, just to show their commitment, and they're, you know, obviously they're the ones that have moved, quite honestly, the slowest in some cases. So it was important, I think, to show that at least for the narrative of this presentation, that these guys are committed to it. We know, I think, yes, the co-ops and all the other the tier 3s that you've mentioned, they've been doing this this is not news to them. But you know, the commitment at all levels of the service provider market, I think, shows the fact that there's going to be sustained demand for the equipment and all of the ecosystem for the remainder of this decade.
Yeah, no, agreed. And you know, certainly we've, you know, a lot of operators are relying on subsidies. You know, some of the large operators are not, and you know, certainly trying to get out in front. The other thing that seems to be interesting is the public-private partnerships, where we're seeing the large incumbents being much more proactive on being flexible on their models to work with communities to make sure everyone's served. So it seems to be a big fiber love fest across the industry. So can you, Jennifer, skip to go up a slide? No, keep going. Yeah, that one's. So this one surprised me, and maybe it's just on the timing, but OLTs, I mean, there's one of those for every 32, 64, 128, whatever your split is, but a whole lot more ONTs and OLTs. Yet, is that that's just the timing of, you know, putting the infrastructure out and then deploying the ONTs when you turn up subscribers? Or?
That's exactly right. Yeah, since the ONTs are success-based, you'll see them really start to tick up beginning in 2023. Now, the other thing, when you compare them just in terms of revenue, the other thing to keep in mind is, you know, with XGS, there's a cost premium that these operators are paying for the OLT ports, and obviously subsidization helps that, but also just the realization that if you're gonna you know, spend the money and the capital on putting the fiber out there, you might as well put the best technology available now out in the form of the electronics. So it's difficult, you know, relationally to just think about the fact that all the revenue is going towards OLTs now. There's still, you know, 5+ million ONTs each year being shipped. So I mean, that is, you know, pretty well in the neighborhood of the fiber subscriber additions that are being tracked each year in the U.S. market.
Hey, Jennifer, can you skip to the XGS chart? Yeah, go back one more. Yeah, so this one, so this isn't any surprise, right? That I think last year we saw the tipping point where more 10 gig PON was being shipped than GPON and growing. What are you seeing as far as, one of the questions that came in from one of your industry peers is that little sliver of NG-PON2, is that just strictly Verizon? Anybody else? Are you seeing anybody else doing NG-PON2?
Nobody else at this point. And you know, Verizon remains committed to it, and in fact, they have talked about ramping that back up. But that's a rather slow build out for them. It's in conjunction, you know, with some of their millimeter wave deployments, where they have multi-service offerings in some cities. They'll be using that and obviously dividing up the different wavelengths between the millimeter wave cell site backhaul and then enterprise services, and only to a very small extent residential services at this point. But at some point, they will also reach a tipping point with respect to GPON, and within the footprint that they already have, we'll begin upgrading those OLTs to support NG-PON2. It's still for a mass market residential service. It still remains quite expensive, even when you know you take into account what Verizon is eliminating on the backside of that, which is in terms of edge aggregation and some of the subscriber management platforms that they've had in place for years.
So one of the questions is, you know, is the upgrade from GPON to XGS PON, is that a forklift or how? So are you seeing a lot of combo PON where, you know, operators are deploying the combo, or I guess there's a number of different ways, right, to be able to use the XGS PON OLTs and remain, you know, keep your existing base of GPON ONTs?
Correct. Yeah, we're seeing a ton of combo PON. In fact, it's the dominant type of technology that's being deployed. And as a matter of fact, in some of these cases with the XGS PON, there's a percentage of those that are reported to us by the vendors as XGS PON that are still running at GPON line rates with the GPON ONT at the end. And that's a benefit. I mean, I think that was a real clear driver for the market was making available combo ports. Not everybody sees the value in that. Not every operator sees the value in that, and that's totally fine. There are certainly plenty of standalone XGS PON ports that are going out into the field as well.
So just there's some questions on a lot of acronyms here. So the OLT, the optical line termination. So that's the head end.
Yep.
So that's the one to many. So one OLT would then that transceiver would blast out. You split that to 32 splits, and then at the home you would have the ONT, the optical network termination. So
that's
OLTs
correct.
at the head end, ONTs at the house.
That's right. Yep.
One to about typically 32, I would say. What are you factoring in on the inflation and the increasing prices? So, a lot of our members are trying to figure out how to put grant applications in. So overall, are you saying that do you think the actual fiber to the home technology is maybe what 11% of the capex for deploying, or what's your number to use?
I mean, I use slightly less than that, but in that range, in the high single-digit range. And in terms of inflationary impact, I think what we've seen is we've seen in general you'll see a price decline as volume shipments increase, right? And we have not seen that. The prices have remained steady for the transceivers, and in some cases the burden has come onto the equipment vendors themselves in terms of their margin profile. But it's the subsidization helps that to a certain extent. But I mean, there's no question. I think that the inflationary impact is more on the labor side. I think that we're seeing. So in terms of planning out the overall project, I think that has a bigger cost impact than the spending on the electronics.
So we have about $130 billion of federal subsidies, between RDOF and ARPA and CAA and the IIJA and every other possible acronym we can come up with. But so what are you seeing on the private capital that's being applied? Is it somewhere similar in those numbers? Because AT&T and Verizon and all those guys are using, private capital, and we're also seeing matching and other things. Do you have a feel for what the overall capex is?
I don't have a feel for exactly what that range is. I do know that it has increased and ramped up considerably on the private capital side, and certainly internationally, this is something that we've been tracking and see all over the place, particularly in Europe and developing countries. It's just I think in general, the momentum has changed. It's good to own infrastructure, and for so long it was seen as something that was going to be a dumb pipe, and now people realize that having that infrastructure is so valuable, and then of course the valuations that we're seeing for fiber networks reflect that, I think, and that's not only a U.S. thing, but it's a global thing as well.
Hey, can we hit on the cable side? So I have this forecast, or I guess I'll call it my crystal ball, is saying that the cable guys are going to be fiber to the home guys sooner than later. Like we've already seen all the cable guys already, go to fiber to the home. But are things like sustainability. I mean, when we look at Europe and every place other than US, you know, the first line on the RP is, you know, zero carbon footprint. And so having all those active components, and do not, when is cable going to start worrying about OpEx and wanting to get to have a low cost of ownership? I mean, what do you anticipate there?
That's a great question, and I think that's the thing that they're wrestling with, and it's why the future around DOCSIS 4.0 is a little cloudier than it has been for any previous DOCSIS technology, and it's because the way forward is not just, this isn't just an extended spectrum versus full duplex question. It's also a question of going to fiber. And in my conversations with the larger cable operators, they're still, you know, doing the math for them. You know, the upgrades to the existing outside plant that they're going to have to do for extended spectrum gives them power consumption efficiency improvements. You know, adding silicon to amplifiers to allow them to do proactive network maintenance, which they, you know, generally couldn't do in those, you know, relatively dumb devices before. So they see that investment, you know, even improving overall sustainability, and you know, they still see that as more valuable than the overall CapEx costs it would take them to you know, build fiber out. But, you know, that momentum shift, it's a pendulum, right?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of duct tape, but at some point, you know, you might as well just go and do the right thing. But so let me just end with this last question: is what are some of the challenges and opportunities for the fiber construction companies in this environment?
Well, I think the challenges currently are just the demand and the ability to satisfy that demand and be able to you know, build out these networks as quickly as the operators want them to. And so that's obviously a good thing and a bad thing. And you know, I really think labor shortages and challenges of getting skilled labor out in the field to do the work are still going to be tough for the next couple of years.
Well, Jeff, I'd love to sit and chat with you the rest of the afternoon. I always love talking to you. So I really appreciate all the work and insights you provide in your research. And I want everybody to thank you for joining us today, and look forward to get back together next Wednesday, where we'll be discussing robust mapping and public-private partnerships unlock rapid broadband funding deployment in Georgia, with Josh Hildebrandt, the Director of Broadband Initiatives at Georgia Technology Authority. And he's going to discuss how Georgia is charting its way forward to deliver high-quality service data and to help enable providers, local communities, and state agencies move together towards a common goal. With that, I will look forward to seeing you guys next Wednesday. Thanks again, Jeff. You guys have a great rest of your week.